Hi, everyone. I'm Whitney Bray. Thank you so much for joining us today for our conversation on cybersecurity. Specifically, today we're going to talk about the shortage of cybersecurity skills and workers and how that affects our American companies and education institutions and also government organizations. So, at MZ Branding Glass, we've been closely monitoring the cybersecurity space for a while, given its importance in the market. So we know right now it is harder than ever to find the necessary cybersecurity skills to fill our essential jobs. And the recent world events have again highlighted, how important it is to combat cyber threats. So right now, unfortunately, there are only 68 workers for every 100 available cybersecurity jobs, which means a lot of our cyber jobs go unfilled, which is not ideal in our current state. So, we're going to talk about that today, and there's really no one more knowledgeable to talk about the cybersecurity subject than our very own cybersecurity talent expert and Vice President of Applied Research, Will Marco. Hi, Will.
Hi, Whitney. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we're also joined today by Dr. James Stanger. He is CompTIA's Chief Technology Evangelist and a recognized authority in security, education, information technology, and analytics. So, hi, James.
Hey man, how you doing?
We are good. I'm excited to kick off this conversation on cybersecurity. You guys are the most knowledgeable in the game. So, let's kick it off here and just talk about, in general, Will, what is happening with cybersecurity and talent shortages? Where are we at?
It's a great question, Whitney. And I think that the first thing I want to impress is that there's a lot of hyperbole around the conversation of the cybersecurity talent shortage, and it can be hard to cut through a lot of that and understand what's really going on. And I think that's also led a lot of people to ask, is there even really a talent shortage? When we look at the data, the answer is a resounding yes. You mentioned that our own data on cyberseek.org shows that we only have enough cybersecurity workers to fill 68% of all cybersecurity jobs. And that shortage is having real pain, is causing real pain for employers who are seeing that cybersecurity jobs take about 20% longer to fill than other IT jobs. They also cost about $12,000 to $15,000 more on average than other IT jobs, which, by the way, are already some of the most expensive and hard to fill jobs in the market. So this shortage is both having real implications for employers as well as our broader national and digital security. But one of the things I think is important to note is that there's the potential for it to get even worse. We are seeing that demand for cybersecurity talent has grown very rapidly, about 4 times as fast as IT jobs overall. And with the recent geopolitical tensions, we're seeing evidence that that demand growth is ramping up even further. If we look at just this past February, which is already the shortest month of the year, we saw the greatest number of job openings for cybersecurity jobs of any month we have ever tracked in the past 10 years at almost 80,000 openings. So what that suggests is that the current climate geopolitically could be causing even greater demand, and that greater demand growth could make it even harder to train enough workers to enter into cybersecurity.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about the challenge of filling those jobs and just kind of explain, what are these jobs? Often people think cybersecurity and they think that super high-tech worker in a government building like NSA or in Cyber Command. And we know that that is not necessarily true, and the need for cyber has expanded into a plethora of industries and job types. So can you talk more about, the breadth of cybersecurity jobs?
The types of jobs that we're looking at do stem a very large range. Some that are really not particularly technical, some that are very technical. For example, we need people who are policy people, compliance people who, whether it be a state law, federal law in the United States, something like GDPR. So we need people who understand compliance to those sorts of things. If you're a company that takes credit cards, there's something called PCI DSS. There's all these standards that you have to work with. So there's an example. We need people who create security policies, people who manage them. We also need people on the technical side who are people who listen for the attacks. Some people will call them blue teamers. They're called security analysts. We need people who administer systems well. You can call that a security administrator if you want, to enable things like two-factor authentication, where you enter a password and then you get some sort of text or some sort of message in an app on your phone, right? That's the second factor. We need those types of workers. We need pen testers. There's so many different types of job roles out there, but there are a lot of reasons why it's hard to fulfill those job roles. Tech is moving very quickly. The bad guys are very creative. And I think there is a bit of, how do you put this? There are a lot of myths out there. I call them myth conceptions, but a lot of myths out there about what it means to bring in a security person.
Yeah, I'd love to double click on that, James. I think you made some great points. And I think that there is this misconception when most people think about cybersecurity workers as those hoodie-wearing hackers in the back, who are,
Yeah.
typing away at their computer and infiltrating systems. But that's really not the case. There are so many different flavors, as you mentioned, of people who have at least one foot in the cybersecurity workforce.
Oh,
I mean, when we look at our own data, the way we define the cybersecurity workforce goes far beyond just a traditional cybersecurity analyst. It includes all of the network admins who need to secure networks. It includes all of the software developers who need to build secure systems and applications. It even extends to many other, what most people would consider non-technical roles that may have increasingly a cybersecurity or privacy related component. And so I think that it's incumbent upon both individuals, but also employers these days to really think through what skills does everybody in your organization need in order to make your organization as secure as possible? It's not that everybody needs to have deep cryptography knowledge, but you should at least have some foundational literacy and how to keep your information and your organization's information as secure as possible.
I'm glad you brought that up. There are a lot of people who are great consumers of technology, but if social engineering is the number one way, social engineering meaning people tricking each other, right? Bad guys tricking us, is the number one way that the bad guys get in. That means that end users need that kind of training. And then you also need cybersecurity training across all levels of the organization. Great point.
So let's talk about that a little bit more, needing cybersecurity at all levels of your organization, because it can be easy to think like, do we just need more cybersecurity workers in IT, or do we just need more IT workers with better cybersecurity skills? But I'm assuming the reality is that several people within your organization outside of IT also need awareness and skills within cybersecurity. So can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely not either or. And I would argue that everybody in your organization needs some foundational cybersecurity literacy. Everybody in your organization needs to have some introductory skills in this field, even if it's just knowing not to click on a link that looks suspicious, which you'd be surprised how often that happens. And I think that organizations in many cases are trying to get creative about where and how they embed some of those skills into their teams. It's great if you're a large Fortune 100 company that has the resources to spin up an entire SOC, Security Operations Center, or a large cybersecurity team. But the reality is the majority of organizations really don't have that luxury. And so they have to think creatively about which workers across both their IT workforce, but their broader workforce in general could learn the right cybersecurity skills to support the level of security and risk tolerance that they have as an organization. And in some cases, the answer might be that they need to work externally with MSPs or other outside advisors and consulting groups who can help them with that. So I think that really in this type of climate for cybersecurity or any other field where you see such a severe talent shortage, as an employer, you really have to be creative about thinking who and where you embed those capabilities within your organization.
Right. So going back to only being able to fill, 68% of all cybersecurity jobs, we can look at a couple solutions. One of them being, let's train our internal people to have these skills. So train the people you already have. We can look at, like you said, using an outside source. But at the end of the day, we still need to fill these jobs, and some roles actually need physical people in them. So where can we go to get these cybersecurity workers, and what should organizations consider when looking for this kind of talent?
I think one of the comments from one of the people in the audience is pretty illustrative. It's a question that says, how quickly could organizations convert a skilled tech worker into a cybersecurity position. And I think that word convert is really important. The idea that you can take people who know your business, who know what's going on, and you can translate them into a cybersecurity worker. There's a lot of myths out there. One of them is, well, security people are just kind of born that way, or, they're security people. And that's not the case. You can upskill. The time it takes, it depends on the person's technical savvy. And we have a whole pathway at CompTIA, various other organizations too. You enter in that pathway where it makes sense. You evaluate your workers. But if somebody already understands things like how endpoints work, how computers work, understands networking, within a matter of mere months, you can get somebody shorter than many months. I'm talking about a few months. You can get somebody who can be converted into a good security worker.
Yeah, I think that those are excellent points, James. And I think that one of the words you said, which I think is really key, is pathway. You need to be able to give people that clear pathway, that clear roadmap that articulates to them and communicates to them. How do you get from point A to point B? What are the specific skills you need to develop? What are the steps you need to take? Might be what credentials could you earn in order to qualify for more roles in cyber? And I think what many organizations are finding, who we talk with, is that it's a lot faster to help build those internal pathways between workers who are already within your organization than trying to go out and hire all of the talent that's, fresh wrapped out of the box, has the perfect set of skills you need, which usually doesn't exist.
Right.
And, in many cases, it can take months to find a cybersecurity worker. You could spend that same amount of time training up somebody else from your technical team in those skills. And guess what? They already know your company culture. They already know your internal tech stack. There's going to be a much shorter learning curve for those people. And so being able to supplement the external hiring you're doing with those clearly defined internal career paths is a really effective way to help expand your talent pipeline for cyber roles.
We did a lot of research, and we showed that there are a lot of people who are veterans, all the way to the people who aren't veterans in security, who aren't aware, they don't see strong pathways, education pathways. And I find that interesting, that a lot of people who are experienced all the way to inexperienced, all are equally like, well, what are the next steps to take? And I think you got a great point about whether you call it company culture, what have you, but the idea, it's probably easier to upskill somebody technically than it is to explain how the company works, because security is very much a liaison, believe it or not, very social, touchy-feely sort of role in a lot of ways. You've got to work things all the way through an organization, and if there is some sort of, people will call it the war, a talent war, or people grabbing people from everywhere. In terms of employees, upskilling the people that you have is probably the best way to go.
Yeah, I love that option. And thank you for the question in the chat. So just a reminder to everyone, we'd love to answer your questions, great questions like that. So keep putting your questions in the chat and we'll get to them here in just a little bit. So Will and James, we just talked about really career pathways and how to upskill internal employees to fill those cybersecurity roles. Is there anything else you guys wanted to touch on how to go out into the labor market and actually find net new employees within cybersecurity?
Oh, please go ahead, James.
Go ahead. You go ahead, man.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that I think that a lot of the same logic applies, that when you're building your internal cyber talent, you don't necessarily have to take somebody who has all of the skills already that you need for cyber. The same goes when you try to hire workers externally. If you look for workers who are in, we call skill adjacent fields, so they have 70, 80, 90% of the skills necessary to transition into cybersecurity, you can dramatically expand your candidate pool. In fact, we found that if organizations are willing to look into those skill adjacent positions related to cybersecurity to fill those roles, they can expand their candidate pool by about 270%, which can make a real dent in trying to fill those seats. So one other thing that I think is worth noting is that a lot of times when we talk about, well, how do we build our cybersecurity workforce and how do we make sure we have enough workers? We always default to saying, well, we need more cybersecurity training programs, which is absolutely true. But if we only build 4-year or master's degree programs, then at a bare minimum, it's going to be 2 to 4 years before those people actually enter the market. And guess what? A lot of employers, they want you to have some prior experience before they even take a chance on you.
That's right.
which is a whole nother issue, which I think employers, they can also think about right sizing their experience and education requirements. But if you think about that logically, you have to find faster ways to redeploy workers into the field than a 2 or 4 year degree. That could be short-term training programs, could be boot camps, it could be getting a credential like Security Plus. And I think that employers, they really need to focus on not just looking at how do we build the long-term pipeline for talent, but how do we build the short-term talent pipeline as quickly as possible and find opportunities to expand our entry-level workforce as well and take chances on some of those workers who maybe they haven't worked in a cyber job for 10 years, but if you don't take a few chances on some workers who haven't, then you're never going to build the next generation of cybersecurity workers.
I like the word nimble there. I think the organizations that are truly nimble and truly transformative, or are willing to really change. Nothing is more transformative than education. And if you find ways to invest in your employees, you'll make it happen. Because as technology changes so quickly, and as attackers are always get more creative, you really need to find ways in your organization to not only upskill the folks, but then make sure that you are deploying them correctly. And there are a lot of ways to do that. Earlier, we mentioned if you're an organization that's smaller, you're like, well, I can't afford to hire a full time person. There are all sorts of managed service providers out there that do a great job of bringing in people who can help you. In other words, you can rent folks to help you focus on the right priorities.
Yeah, I think that's great. We talked about building those skills internally, how to look to specialized training programs instead of just the typical 4 year degree
Yeah.
for that flow of talent. But let's transition a little bit and talk about the scope of work for a typical person within an organization. And I think this varies, like you just said, James, between companies that are small and companies that are really large. But typically, what happens in the IT world is that people are pulling double duty, right? They're maintaining networks and computers while also handling all things cybersecurity. So let's talk about, is that right? Is that a problem? What is the workload of these people? What should they be managing?
Sometimes the workload can be an issue in regards to IT workers, especially over the last couple of few years, we've seen a certain amount of burnout factor and things like that. And one of the things that's really important in working with individuals in the workforce is making sure that they are given the right focus to work on it and they work things out the right way. And one of the first things you think about is kind of we call it a strategic IT perspective. So as you get your people properly trained, as you get them on board, it's really important to be working with your IT, with your security people, and that they are in the discussions, that in the strategic marketing discussions and with the strategic discussions with executive management, because so many of the technological solutions that IT people bring are the ones that are really going to allow the organization to thrive. You can't just treat technology as a separate thing anymore. It has to be strategic.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, James. And I really want to double click on that as well, because our own research has found that technical workers, they need a whole lot more than just technical skills.
Yeah.
We found that they need the human skills, the interpersonal skills like critical thinking, communication, collaboration. And actually, we find that cybersecurity and IT workers in general are more likely to have employers ask for those skills than for most other roles. But we also find that there's another bucket of skills that is critical for cyber workers and IT workers more generally. And we call those the business enabling skills. Those are business process skills, those are project management skills, and those are the skills that really enable you to connect what you're doing with why you're doing it and to communicate the value that you're adding to many diverse sets of stakeholders. And what we find is that both the individuals and the organizations that have workers who really invest in developing those business enabling skills in addition to those technical skills are much more adaptable. They're much better at connecting new technical concepts to real business outcomes and business opportunities. And it really unlocks a new level of innovation within your organization when your technical folks can speak the same language as your marketing or your finance or your business folks.
I remember over the years interviewing for various types of positions in the security space, and it was interesting to see that they didn't. I won't say they didn't care, but they were more interested in what kind of work had I done in terms of communication, in terms of getting projects on time, and also that kind of liaison role was really been foregrounded over the years.
Yeah, well, can you give us just another recap of the current state of the cybersecurity talent market? I know we touched on that a little bit at the beginning, but I think in light of everything we just talked about, shortages, internal training and upskilling, career pathways, what is the current state? Where are we going from here?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just to recap, I think the name of the game in cybersecurity is that demand is already large and it's growing rapidly. We have around 600,000 openings every year for cybersecurity workers. As I mentioned, we're seeing the most rapid growth we have ever seen in the space as a result of some of the recent geopolitical tensions. So there's a lot of evidence that the talent shortage, which already we only have 68 workers for every 100 that we need, it could be getting a lot worse. And one other thing that I'll note is that with that rapid growth, we're not just talking about rapid growth in headcount. We're also talking about rapid growth in new skill sets. There's a constantly evolving set of threats. There's a constantly evolving set of technologies that now need to be secured. And that is creating a constantly evolving set of skills that people really need to build if you're in cybersecurity. It used to be the case that everybody was focused on more compliance-based skills, for example, or reactive security skills. Once an attack happens, what do you do? Now we're seeing a shift towards more proactive security skills that really are asking software developers to build secure applications from the ground up, that are asking for us to focus more on embedding risk management frameworks into every aspect of our business. And we're seeing that the shift to cloud means that everybody now needs to have cloud security skills and understand how to secure that infrastructure in a way that they never really did in the past. And so that also makes it very difficult to keep your cybersecurity workforce up to date, where even if magically we had enough people in those with butts and seats, if we don't constantly evolve the skill sets in response to a constantly evolving threat and technological landscape, then we're still going to have a problem.
We're also seeing a lot of people use the phrase zero trust to describe about a half a dozen to a dozen different technologies having to do with automation and response orchestration and things like that. And as people move from traditional networking models, kind of inside outside or east west kind of networking models, into zero trust, we're seeing a whole new set of skills there that are necessary, and we really need individuals who can morph along with that and who can really support those kinds of technologies and approaches.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, especially we were doing a report a couple months back that was reviewing, the top skills from 2021 and the skills that had the most growth. And I'm not surprised to see that development security operations was, the top growth skill and technical skills with 221% growth. I mean, that's huge. And it only adds to this conversation of, you know,
You
there's
bet.
a huge gap in skills and a lot of new skills coming about all the time. And this is an important field and important to the security of our country. So I'd love to take some questions now. I know we have some in the chat that we'll go through. Thank you so much, James and Will. If anyone else has questions, feel free to add them in the chat. So question number 1, how many of those are jobs or temporary contract work?
There are a lot of temporary jobs and things out there. You'd be surprised how quickly you can parlay several temporary jobs into much more than a full-time job. Yes, there are temporary contract jobs, but they're not as temporary as just a week long. I mean, many of these contract jobs are months in tenure and oftentimes turn into full-time jobs if that's what you want. I know a lot of people right now who've actually quit their main gig, as it were, and are doing working full time on various temporary jobs. There's a lot of work out there for them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And one other thing I'd add is a lot of times that temporary or contract work is really driven by a disconnect between the HR team and the cybersecurity team, and what the cybersecurity team is actually able to secure budget for in terms of full-time headcount. I had a conversation with the CISO recently, for example, who said, "Hey, I have entire responsibility for security at our $4 billion enterprise," which, by the way, is a tech company, not a legacy manufacturing firm or something like that. They are a digitally native organization, 4 billion in revenue. And he was like, I am not allowed to have more than 3 headcount. I can only have 3 people in my entire team. But he had basically unlimited funds for contractors or consultants, and he was able to bring them in under part-time work or contract work or whatever, what have you. And so I think that is being used as a stopgap in many organizations. When you can't get enough full-time headcount, you can at least try to supplement with part-time or contract or consulting work.
Yeah, great point. So we've been talking about this conversation from really the organization institution standpoint for companies, government, and education. But we have a question here in the chat talking about the individual. So if you are not in the IT space currently, but interested in this type of work, where can these people start? Where should they start?
A lot of different places you can start, but I would imagine one of the first places you could go is cyberseek.org. Will, what do you think about that? Cyberseek's a great place because what you can do is drill right down into information that's in real time. It's not just theoretical information or what have you. It talks about job openings and job skills and that sort of thing. You can drill right down into states, into counties, into cities, things like that. Will?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think CyberSeek is also a good resource because it has those career pathways we were talking about. It enumerates what are the different roles in cyber, what are the different skills needed for those roles, the educational credentials. It also shows what are some of those skill adjacent roles, those feeder roles that could be used as jumping off points, such as network administration or even some roles in risk or software that if you at least dip your toe in those waters, you're getting a lot of the skills you need for a transition into cyber later on. And so I think that being able to see very clearly what are those opportunities, what are the skills and credentials you need to prepare for those opportunities, and then what are the concrete steps you can take makes it much more actionable and tangible in career seekers' minds.
And to that question, if you're not in the IT space and you're interested in the types of jobs, that's the first thing. Take a look at various, job posting boards and things like that. I think CyberSeek is a fantastic way to start. But don't stop there. It's all about the application, and by application, I don't necessarily mean, coding and applications and things. I'm talking about hands-on. As you start into the security world and you hear about a concept or some sort of technique or something like that, don't just read about it and don't just talk to folks about it. Download some software, download some virtualization software, such as VirtualBox. That's what I use. Or go up to the cloud and use some of the free services there and start practicing this stuff. Don't let yourself just become some sort of theoretical person. It's all about the practical. So that's a great way to get started. And then you can learn about endpoints, about networking, about security. It's off to the races then.
Yeah, really great points. Let's talk a little bit about the cost of training for cybersecurity. This is a big conversation because
Yeah.
skills in this area are high valued skills. They're more unique a little bit. They take more training. So we have a question here about estimated cost of cybercrime is in the trillions worldwide. How do we see governments responding to the training need?
Couple of things to think about there. One of the reasons why a lot of organizations don't want to do training is because they feel they don't have the money and to do that. And what they do is they've never been able to really quantify, well, the attacks on my company or my company's lack of agility in the security or IT space. They can't quantify it, but they can certainly quantify, well, that's an expensive course, or hiring those people or renting those people is expensive. And so that's one of the reasons why we see it getting into the multi-trillions, this problem worldwide. So when it comes to government, There are a lot of things that are happening. For example, the NIST NICE initiative, but also the government is doing a great job in reaching out with CMMC, for example, with other efforts to get contractors and to get people who are partners to adhere to standards. For years, there's been the 8570, now 8140 initiative, which is that anybody who is in the Army, Navy, in the DoD, or a contractor to the DoD has to be certified in what they do, and that's something that has there's several efforts that I've thrown out there that the government has done, but it really focuses on making sure people have the hands-on skills. Will?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And one of the things that I touch on as well, you started to talk about the cost benefit analysis that employers will often take, and why it's so hard to quantify the benefit. But it's very easy to quantify the cost of training. One of the things that we try to impress upon employers is that there actually is a real tangible ROI to investing in training for many of these cybersecurity skills, even beyond just the reduced likelihood that there's going to be an attack, which, by the way, is probably enough in and of itself. But if you actually look at the salary premium that you have to pay for a lot of the cybersecurity skills we're talking about, especially some of the emerging ones like cloud security or various types of emerging capabilities like DevSecOps, on average, if you hire a cyber worker with those skills, you're paying a salary premium of $10,000, $15,000 or more. It doesn't cost $15,000 to train someone in one or two skills. So if you can identify as an organization, what are those skill sets that are going to come with the greatest salary premiums, well, then that's also going to tell you what are the skills where you will get the greatest ROI on your training investment.
One last question here to really hit that one home. With so many people throughout a company accessing the cloud or communicating, sensitive information with people on the outside, can you one more time address the need for cybersecurity skills beyond just the IT roles in security? Are more companies training their general employees on basic cybersecurity skills across all roles to have a stronger defense?
Not enough organizations are, and I would argue that companies that train people in basic cybersecurity skills across all roles, I would argue that's not the second line of defense, it's first. It has to be the first. People will talk about layered security, and it's usually an old school way of thinking about it. But I will say this. The first thing to think about when it comes to security is making sure people are not only literate at what they do in terms of their work, but that they understand the implications of the things that they do every day. And there's also another element of working in not only people who care about the implications of what they're doing, the implications of being in a hurry at work so that, oh gosh, I shouldn't have clicked on that link. There's that, but also being a good skeptical worker, not cynical. Nobody needs a cynical worker. We have plenty of cynicism around, but a skeptical worker who's like, maybe I shouldn't click on that. Or if that message came to me in a certain way, like email, then maybe I can communicate back with that person separately, like give them a phone call. Or back in the day, it was you'd prairie dog. You'd stand up in the cubicle and say, "Hey, did you mean to send me that email?" Things like that. It's being able to really educate people and get that into the company culture, what it means to be secure. That way, it's not a separate consideration, right? It's something that is just kind of part of muscle memory.
I completely agree with that. And in the age of digital warfare, everybody with a computer is on the battlefield. There's no way to avoid it. Everybody who has email or might potentially click on a malicious link is somebody who needs to know when to look out for those malicious links and how to look out for them, and how to be secure in your digital hygiene. And I think that organizations, to your point, James, they recognize that, but they don't always invest in the training that's really necessary to build that foundational digital privacy literacy within their organization. And that's much of the time how organizations are getting burned because somebody just didn't have that foundational literacy. And so I think that being able to both look at those more sophisticated technical skills that your IT and cyber teams needs. That's great, but it only goes so far if everyone else across your organization is at risk of clicking on a malicious link or just doesn't know how to look out for the right things. And so I think that really is foundational to build those skill sets in everybody across your organization.
I'm glad you said foundational, Will, because it comes down to these organizations that kind of have a mature way about them. If they've been, folding in security with their employees, if they've been bringing in the right resources, that suggests a company kind of has this a healthy way of adjusting to technological issues or adjusting to various things. So whether it be Log4j or SolarWinds back in the day, or now with Ukraine, if an organization has that kind of mature processes and understanding of their employees and their skill sets, then they'll be able to adjust quite well to current conditions.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. I think your expertise is really valuable here. Really enjoyed talking with both of you about this important subject. Are there any last minute notes that you guys wanted to make before we sign off here?
One thing, there was a question, David asked a question, David Lang, what advice would you offer to institutional providers of these training skills? The institutional providers, I would say the first advice is don't necessarily think about the latest brand new thing or whatever like that. I think it's really important to focus on the hands-on skills, and it's really important to focus on helping organizations understand what is the most pressing security issue for their organization. Security is a very practical thing, and it's a very focused thing. One organization's security needs are going to be a little bit different than another's, and it's that sensitivity and understanding that, and then training to it will win the day. At least the current day. Tomorrow is always a different story, isn't it? So.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Just the last thing I would add is that building cybersecurity teams, building cybersecurity skills, it's not a destination that you magically arrive at one day. It's a journey. There's always going to be new threats. There are always going to be new technologies. There are always going to be new skills that you need to build as either an individual in the field or an organization trying to secure your digital infrastructure. So this really is a field where you need a continuous improvement mindset so that you can constantly evolve and constantly build the capabilities and skill sets that you need in order to protect against an evolving threat landscape.
Cool.
Yeah, we talked about so many great things in today's live. One of them being, building career pathways, identifying the skills within your organization, building these skills within all employees in your company. So if you would like more help with that, or if you have questions, need advice on skill building or finding cybersecurity talent, please reach out. We'd love to help you. Another great resource for those of you looking to enter into the cybersecurity space, like we talked about, is cyberseek.org. This was created by both MZ Burning Glass and CompTIA to track cybersecurity jobs in the market and, providing those career pathway opportunities for starting a cybersecurity career. So lots of great resources out there. This has been a really informative and great conversation. So thank you, Will and James, for your expertise. I look forward to talking to you guys again soon.